call the member for Lawler.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And I rise with colleagues on this side to support this bill and to welcome some of the changes that are being addressed, but to suggest further changes that may in fact go further and address a serious issue that obviously has been highlighted in the press and been highlighted in the chamber this morning as speaker after speaker has told stories from their electorates. And one of the reasons that we're all fully aware of this is not just because people have been walking into our offices to talk to us about it, because, bluntly, Deputy Speaker, a lot of our most vulnerable aren't big complainers. They don't necessarily have the assertiveness, the confidence to raise a complaint about these issues, and I think that's been one of the issues and why this has been going on for so long. But the report from the University of Sydney has certainly shone a light on the area of vet provision and some of the things that have been occurring, and it's done so recently. A Senate inquiry has assisted with that as well, but it's been the study from the University of Sydney that has certainly shone a light on some of these practices, and that's merely through looking at the figures. The report identified businesses in the vocational education sector making super profits of 30%. And now that surely should be ringing alarm bells. Clearly it points to a problem. 30% profit is not usual, and one might argue it's not possible if you're delivering quality education in any sector. And there is another alarming statistic to come in that report, and that is that in Victoria, the TAFE sector, that is our traditionally trusted provider of vets, one that provides the quality that we expect in our training and skills program, has been dramatically marginalised. In fact, it has gone from providing 70% of vet training in Victoria down to 20% of training in Victoria. So both of those things clearly show that there's a structural problem occurring in this sector and it needs to be addressed. And of course it wouldn't be a problem if the Victorian figures of reducing to 20% were being replaced with high quality education. But given the 30% super profits and the stories that we're hearing and that are being highlighted in the press of late, we now know that that's not true. And we certainly know that these things need to be addressed, and therefore I welcome the amendments in front of us this morning. Deputy Speaker, this sector certainly needs reform. The market-based mechanisms have no place in the case management of our most vulnerable on their journey to secure training and employment. Deputy Speaker, last year Shadow Minister for Vocational Education Sharon Bird and I met with about 30 apprentices at the Werribee Plaza site in my electorate. This is a huge building project that is underway, employing several hundred tradespeople, and pleasingly there were a healthy number of apprentices employed. But in this meeting with these young Australians, all proud of having secured an apprenticeship, a great start to their working lives, they were also keen to share some of their negative experiences. And the conversation soon turned to off-site training they were going through, and two common topics were cost and quality. These apprentices told of starting with one RTO, one that had lobbied their employer as a so-called cheaper option to TAFE, only to switch after a term because the quality was so poor. And these stories started to come through. They spoke of teachers with poor English, of assessment where the answers were provided. Now, for a former teacher, I don't think I need to lecture the chamber, but if you're going to give a student a test, it's a test of your teaching more than it's a test of their learning, and you certainly don't provide the answers, so you give yourself on a pat in the back when they get 100%. They also complained of classes that were cancelled and never made up. These apprentices and their employers were genuine in trying to gain skills, real training, had a genuine desire to learn and to improve, but this was not what they'd found in the sector. Many of them had changed providers in order to find one with quality. Most preferred the TAFE options as they felt the quality was so much higher, and the teachers were genuine in wanting these young adults to acquire real skills. And the employers could also see the benefit of utilising a quality provider. And we've heard from the member preceding me similar stories about quality. The quality could be found if they went out to look. However, if you're an employer with less scruples or an apprentice that knew no better, would you go and look for it? These are the questions. I didn't ask at the time whether any attempted to make a formal complaint regarding the poor providers, but I suspect not. And just last week, Deputy Leader, I met with a community leader in my office, a representative of a growing ethnic group in the electorate. As part of the meeting, which was wide-ranging, he mentioned that he had been approached by several women in the community who had been placed in training. They were very proud and happy to participate in the training, and a large number were training in certificate courses that enabled them to become child carers. And although they'd participated and qualified, they actually had limited knowledge about how to establish themselves as a carer. The training did not actually provide the skills they needed to lift themselves into employment and start making a valuable contribution to our society. And I know that I won't be the first person nor the last person today to speak of this happening in their communities. It also follows recent stories of various childcare centres locally refusing to take graduates from some RTOs who had a poor reputation for quality. And I know some will argue that this is the market doing its work. However, those people who've done those courses, that one-off opportunity that can't do a course of a similar accreditation again in a different field and get that kind of support, for them that's too late. As last year's high school graduates are weaving through the maze of options for post-school education, there seems to have been an increasing number of media reports about these unscrupulous RTOs preying on vulnerable students, and again we're hearing about that today. Being hoodwinked into enrolling for courses that are poor quality with no real job prospects at the end of it. And sometimes these people don't even realise they've signed up to a significant debt. Deputy Speaker, it's pleasing that this bill goes some way to address these issues. It builds on the work of the previous government and, of course, which established the Australian Skills Quality Authority, AQSA, in 2011. And we on this side of the chamber know and understand the strong regulation of the sector is important to ensure that young people receive quality training and are not signing away for a large debt. And I'm pleased to see the current government allocate a further $68 million to AQSA last year and that they have established a national training complaints hotline. I'm also pleased to see new standards are being implemented next month. These are important because the stories are growing in our communities. And they're growing because the fact is, amongst the for-profit operators, there are unscrupulous providers that are hawking vet courses door to door, or worse, cleverly hiring community learning centres to add a level of legitimacy to their activities. They are preying on the vulnerable. And Deputy Speaker, one story from my electorate that I think has a happy ending but carries a moral with it is about a young man. Now, he was a job seeker, hadn't been unemployed for a long time, had left school, had a couple of jobs, and as with most young people, he was utilising the internet and the modern recruitment tools, and he found a position advertised on Seek, to which he promptly responded, sent in his resume, got an interview. He attended the interview, but he came home not with a job, but with a course already signed up. No independent career guidance, which you'll understand as a teacher I value highly, no one explaining the regulations around certification and Commonwealth funding, no understanding of the full array of options if he had seriously considered re-engaging in education. And his story stunned me, not just that he had responded to a job advertisement and come out with a course, but he'd signed up for a vast array of certificates. They all looked good on paper. He was going to do a 10-week course. He did. He attended. He was told in the 8th week that the last certificate would not be completed in this 10 weeks. It would occur when they got the numbers and that they would call him. He didn't get the call. It won't surprise anyone in the chamber to know that this last certificate was, of course, the most expensive certificate, also the one that probably made him the most job ready. He pursued the issue by phone several times, but the promised callbacks didn't eventuate. Some months later, he saw the same ad in Seek, and he rang the number. He secured another interview and he got his gotcha moment. He ultimately got the certification and the Commonwealth got value for money. He is employed, he has been employed since gaining that certification. So it is a happy ending, but immoral, about unscrupulous for-profit operators. Deputy Speaker, Labor recognises the importance of quality assurance, and today we've suggested what we think are some sensible amendments to go with the amendments being put forward by the government. We must free the regulator to chase the real dodgy providers, those making super profits off the back of our taxes and vulnerable students. We've seen reports of RTO businesses making super profits of 30% in the vocational education sector, and that clearly points to a problem. And in the process, people are being exploited, and this also needs to be addressed. Now, Senator Carr and Shadow Minister Bird have been fierce advocates in calling for action because they've recognised that the market-based mechanisms have no place in the case management of these vulnerable people. The fact is that amongst the operators motivated by profit, there are unscrupulous providers. So we have suggested some amendments that we think strengthen the bill and take a few steps further, importantly to improve the regulatory oversight of the sector, but also to improve the support to those people who have been caught up in this system, the vulnerable individuals who possibly have been left with large debts and, in some cases, no qualifications or useless qualifications. So, whilst the bill goes some way, we suggest these amendments. And one amendment, as a case in point, is the notion of extending the registration to 7 years, and our amendment calls that that only be offered to low-risk providers, with the guise that it sends, with the view that it sends the wrong signal to extend the period for registration and therefore the length of time without an audit, although we recognise that the intent of that part of this amendment is in fact to free up the regulator so that they, from doing continuous audits. So we think that that would reverse that signal to the market and ensure that those low-risk operators were free to continue and free up the regulator to do some of that work. But we also call on the government to act with more urgency to ensure the protection of students is prioritised in this process, and seek a consumer protection information campaign by the ACCC, including advice for people who need to seek redress, and consider other mechanisms available to strengthen consumer protections in the sector. And Labor supports the call for the Auditor-General to conduct an audit on the use of vet fee help. Deputy Speaker, it is obviously an area of passion of mine. The most compelling argument I think I have left to the end of my time and my contribution, and that is around schools. And if I can give you this example. These unscrupulous providers are not just knocking door to door. They're not just trying to engage people who've lost their job. They're not just trying to engage people who have been long-term unemployed. They are actively pursuing current secondary students. And if I can give you a scenario that might help you understand. In a high school like the one where I worked for many years, we have many vulnerable students, at-risk students, who have many things in their life that make them at risk. And one of the safest things for them to do is to maintain their enrolment in a school and maintain attendance at a school. And to that end, schools put wraparound support in place for some of our most vulnerable children, with the view of keeping them at school as long as they can. And I know that in schools around the country right now, some of those children are coming back to school to say, I'm here to exit because I'm going to go and do a course. The course won't come with careers guidance. It won't come with welfare support. You'll have a Year 9 or a Year 10 student, 14 years and 9 months, heading off to do a course that they've signed up to. And unbeknownst to them, it will disconnect them from their education. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Lawler.